One of the biggest differences between people who live in the public eye and those who do not is that the former tends to understand how to tell their own story more clearly. I'm Colin Wright, and you are watching Consider This. This is something that doesn't come naturally to most of us, I think, because to most of us we suffer from the burden of knowledge. That is, we know too much about ourselves, and that makes telling stories about ourselves and explaining who we are and what we believe an incredibly difficult task. It's actually more difficult to tell a clear and concise and pointed and hopefully entertaining story when you know too much than when you know too little. This burden of knowledge concept references the idea that to us, everything about us seems inherently interesting and important. These are things that directly impact us. It's the same as telling somebody about a dream that you had. To you, this dream might be really meaningful and important, but to the person who is listening to you talk about this dream, it's probably something that is vague and untethered from reality, and they're sitting there very politely listening but not understanding why you're telling them this. Most ideally, when we want to tell a story about ourselves, we do something that I tend to call iceberging. And iceberging is shorthand for a concept of branding that involves stripping away the unnecessary components of a story and telling something about yourself that serves as a hook that makes people interested and want to know more. That little tip of iceberg makes you want to get a little bit closer, and it doesn't necessarily give away the fact that there's this massive amount of ice underneath, but it implies that there's something more, because we understand that if you're just showing this little bit and you feel comfortable just showing this little bit, then that means that you're confident with the story that you have to tell. Now, the difficult part, of course, is figuring out what part you want to express, what part you want to make part of that tip of the iceberg, and which you can safely leave beneath the surface for people to discover later once they've been hooked by your story. It's important to note, too, that this should be true, whatever story you're telling. Don't make something up and try to make that part of your story. That's something that will almost always be discovered, and you will look like an idiot, and you will start to feel self-conscious, too, because the thing that people like about you will be this not true thing. So I would definitely recommend against what's called black hat branding, which is inventing something about yourself in order to seem bigger or more interesting than you are. Much better than trying to fake something about yourself is to develop the skill that allows you to tell things that are true in an interesting way. And all this is learning basic storytelling skills. A good place to start is to figure out what it is you're trying to communicate with the story that you're telling. What's the moral? Think of it in terms of like Aesop's fables. If there was a moral at the end of the story that you're telling, what is it? What point are you trying to make with this story? What sub-point are you trying to make as well? It may be that you're telling a story and there's a very clear ending and a very clear point to it, but what's the point that people read into later, that they understand without you having to say it? It's also important to recognize that you can reinforce the stories that you're telling about yourself using different media. You can tell a story very clearly on a YouTube video, and you can write the same thing, maybe using different words because they read better than they are conveyed and presented on video. But then you can also share similar things that reinforce that story or add context to it through Instagram, or through tweets, or through Facebook messages. There's a lot of different ways to share and tell stories. And the idea is that every single person who reads, or watches, or interacts somehow with that tip of your iceberg, they want to follow the rest down. They want to see what else you've got, who else you are. A good place to start with all of this is to figure out who you are and what you want to convey to the world. What is it that you're trying to express? What are some themes that matter to you, some things that you've learned about over the years that you can share with other people through stories of how you achieved this same knowledge? Then figure out how to reinforce this message, how to double down on it, and then how to hook people with little stories here and there before drawing them into the bigger context, into the bigger story of you. Throwing too much information at somebody is the same as throwing no information. They won't know what's important, and as a result will not be interested enough and intrigued enough to dig deeper and explore what it is that you have to tell them. Much better to be very selective, very simple and minimal with what you share. Share a very finely honed, sharpened version of yourself, and ensure that it's interesting and or valuable enough that people will want to follow it back to the source and find out more about who you are on a larger scale. Basic storytelling skills are valuable to have Because if you have any beliefs, if you have things that you think are important, being able to speak about these things and being able to make them personal by telling them in the context of you is one of the better ways to convey it. We as humans, our history is steeped in oral tradition. We tell stories and we remember stories much better than bullet points or facts or statistics or anything else. Add context, add meaning to the things that you believe in, and become a good storyteller, starting with yourself and your own stories. And you'll find that it's much, much easier to get other people excited about the same important things that you are excited about. If you like this video, a like or a share or a subscription would be very much appreciated. If you want to say howdy elsewhere, you can find me at Colin is my name on pretty much every social network. And if you want to find out more about me and my work, you can go to colin.io.